afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege for me to welcome you all to the second national webinar conducted by Bhattacharyas and Associates, Advocates and Consultants. Thank you for being with us today. The response to our first national webinar held on 9th August 2020 was highly encouraging. Being fortified with the rich feedback of the first national webinar, we have ventured to organize the instant one. For those participants who have joined for the first time today, I give a brief introduction of us. We are a law firm based in Kolkata, working all over India on a variety of issues, especially in taxation matters. So today, this occasion is graced by Honorable Retired Justice of Calcutta High Court, Sri Pranab Kumar Dev, who is devoting his valuable time to chair this August session. We are also delighted to welcome our special invitee panel, Honorable Justice Shonjit Majumdar, Sitting Judge, West Bengal Taxation Tribunal, Honorable Sri Manush Kumar Pal, former District and Session Judge, Baharampur, and former Registrar, Circuit Bench, Andaman, retired as Judge, City Civil Court. Honorable Sri Shubhayu Banerjee, Registrar, National Green Tribunal, Eastern Zonal Bench, Kolkata. Learned Sri Siddhartha Mukhopadhyay, Vice Chairman, Bar Council of West Bengal and General Secretary, Tax Advocates Association of West Bengal, which is commonly known as TAP. We also welcome our other special dignitaries from the higher judicial and administrative strata who are present in today's August gathering and do not wish to be named. They have come to witness today's session out of pure love and affection and dedication to the subject. Thank you so much. We sincerely thank you all for your tremendous support and encouragement. Without you all, we couldn't have done this. We extend a special welcome to our guest of honor, eminent legal personality, Honorable Justice Pranab Kumar Dev, MA LLB. Born on 10th May 1948, Honorable Justice Pranab Kumar Dev joined the West Bengal Judicial Service on 28th April 1975. He served as District Judge, Bankura, Registrar of Circuit Bench of Calcutta High Court at Port Blair, Judge, Tada Court, and as the Honorable Tada Judge, my Lord had the distinguished accomplishment of ordering the execution of infamous Rashid Khan, the prime accused of Kolkata Bowbazar bomb blast case. It's such an honor being not just being a partner of Bhattacharyas and Associates, sir. I personally want to thank you for such a remarkable judgment, for the honesty and integrity that you have shown. Thank you so much. And also Principal Secretary, Judicial Department, Government of West Bengal, before being elevated to Calcutta High Court on 19 January 2004. After retirement from High Court at Calcutta on 10th May 2010, he was appointed as Chairman of the West Bengal Taxation Tribunal and served for 5 years as Honorable Chairman. I would now request the senior most co-founder and managing partner of our firm, Mr. Sugato Bhattacharya, to say a few words. Sir, please.
Respected Honorable Justice Pranab Kumar Dev and all other legal luminaries and all other participants who have shown keen interest to attend this webinar. We are grateful to all of you, sirs. We feel highly inspired and intend to carry on further similar webinar in future. As already stated, The topic for discussion today is Article 14, the unequality mandate. A very interesting topic. I request the Honorable Justice Pranab Kumar Dev, our guest of honor today, to formally declare the discussion session open and deliver his keynote address. Sir.
So the concept of equality is more or less of political and social equality. The concept of economic equality has not been engrafted in our constitution, though in interpreting the various provisions, the courts of the lead court particularly accepted the proposition that there will be equal pay for equal work.
There's some technical issue, I guess. Thanks a lot for being patient with us. We are trying to reconnect with him. I know you people all are very busy, so we will go on with the seminar, with the webinar today. But for now, I would like to request Ms. Sritapa Sinha to welcome our main speaker today, the partner of Bhattacharyas and Associates, Mr. Bodhan Bhattacharya. Ms. Sinha, please.
Good evening, everyone. It's my distinct honor and a privilege to introduce you in this occasion. We have planned an exciting program for all of you. Today, our speaker is Mr. Bodhan Bhattacharya, advocate, co-founder, and managing partner of Bhattacharya and Associates. Mr. Bhattacharya obtained his law degree from Symbiosis International University of Pune, later obtained LLM. He has been practicing regularly in various high courts like Calcutta, Delhi, Bombay, Gujarat, Guwahati, Sikkim high courts, and various tribunals for taxation and service matter. Mr. Bhattacharya, over to you.
With all my humility to the respected chair and the august audience today, with my folded hands, I apologize for the technical and the non-technical issues that have cropped up. Actually, we tried to contact Justice Dev as well, but unfortunately, his cell is also not reachable. Anyway, let's come up with it. As I was saying on the last occasion, my grandmother at times used to say, "Mostoke badha phal karjo siddhi," meaning when something at the start you get hiccups, then in all probability the end outcome is good. So I still hope that you enjoy the proposition. The mandate of equality. I guess I'm audible to everybody. No issues on audio, right? Kindly give me a thumbs up.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So as I was saying, let us first take a leaf out of the pages of history to see and rather admire what we had in the way of Article 14. When Article 14 or equality mandate is not something that is that is something very novel. It's not something very novel. It was there from time antiquity. It was there from time immemorial. But the question is, how long back was it there? I'm tempted to quote from Rig Veda, the 10th book, 191st chapter, and the last 3 shlokas. Samgo chadvam, samvo dadvam, samvo manamsi janatam. Deva bhagam yatha purve, sam janana upasate. Samano mantraha samiti samani, samanam manaha sahachittamesham. Samanam mantram abhimantraebha, samanena bho havisha juhomi. Samani bho akuti, samana hridayani bha, samano mastu bho mana, yatha va su sahasati. Now, I know to most of us, the repetition of the word saman is at least recognizable. Unfortunately, we do not, even in our childhood, we did not get much exposure to Sanskrit. But anyway, what we can understand from here is the concept and the repeating concept of samana, being samana. Samana means being equal. Now, if I very roughly translate it into English, I can say this is be equal, speak equally in harmony. Let your minds apprehend equally. Equal be your prayer, samana mantra, samiti samani. Equal be the end of your assembly. Equal be your resolution, equal be your deliberation, equal be your feelings, equal be your hearts. Equal be your intentions. Equal be your equality. That last line is perhaps the punch. Equal be your equality. Equality should be so that it, like I remember in many cases we say justice should not only be done, but it should seem to have also been done. So that's how equality should be equal in all respect. Just another tacit reference again to the yesteryears, not specifically to the doctrines and law, because we all know what Article 14 is. We all know there are many case references. In fact, I will be referring to 5 case references. But before that, I know the moment I go into those, the session is bound to get a bit more monotonous. All papers and pens, white and black. So before that, I take this opportunity to just share with you a small piece of information. Rabindranath Tagore, he wrote the poem Bharata Bhagya Vidhata. Bharata Bhagya Vidhata has 5 stanzas, out of which one stanza, the first stanza, is a national anthem. Now, if you take the poem Punjab, Sindhu, Gujarat, Maratha, Dravida, Utkala, Vanga. So whom are we worshipping? We are worshipping Bharata Bhagya Vidhata. That's a concept, the Prana Purush of Bharata. From wherever you belong, Punjab, Sindhu, Gujarat, Maratha, Dravida, Utkala, Vanga, from wherever you come. So it's the equality of people, irrespective of origin. Then if you come back to the second stanza, which is of course not a part of national anthem, but it's in the song, in the poem itself. Aharaha tava mahima pracharita sunitava udaravani Hindu Buddha Sikh Jaina Parasika Musalman Krishtani. So here again, whatever be your religion, you are praying to the one and the same person. Who's that? Bharata Bhagya Vidhata. There's a school of thought who suggests and who actually believes that Rabindranath Tagore was inspired from the last 3 slokas of Rig Veda while writing this. Now the most marvelous part which I consider of this poem itself, at one point of time, in certain in the depths of the paragraph, Rabindranath Tagore, he writes, Duswapne atanke raksha karile anke. Anka is the lap. Snehamai tumi mata. Now see, we were talking about Bharata Bhagya Vidhata as the Purusha, as a male. It was a he till now. All on a sudden, it becomes Bharata Bhagya Vidhata becomes Snehamai Mata, or the loving and doting mother. So here once again we experience the equality of gender. As we all know, in Vedic period, gender equality was there. Even the women used to have their sacred threads, Janayu. Anyway, now this was the pretext. This was the context of the Indian origin of Article 14. But this concept of unequals being treated unequally, Article 14 mandates that not only equals be treated equally, but unequals should be treated unequally. Otherwise, we tend to offend Article 14. Now, when we say unequals to be treated unequally, I'm once again tempted to go back to 2000 years ago, Aristotle, who who promulgated the theories of justices. Justice retributiva, justice distributiva. Justice retributiva is nothing but the principle an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, which says that one must not be getting anything which his doings are not commensurated with. That means when you punish a person for his doings, it is all the more a responsibility to see that this person does not get a punishment which is not commensurate to the offense that he has committed. He must not be punished more and he must not be punished less as well. So that is the retributive theory of justice. Now, distributive theory of justice, if I come back to, that says one must get whatever one deserves, neither more nor less. So this is practically this is what we all know about the theories of justices of Aristotle. And Aristotle was the propounder who said unequals should be treated unequally. Otherwise, if you treat, because this doctrine, there is a positive part which says equal should be treated equally. There's a negative or a not so positive part which says unequals to be treated unequally. Because if you tend to treat unequals equally, then obviously the classification gets hampered. There's no classification. And classification forms the very basis of Article 14. So once it gets hampered, obviously, if the classification is gone, then the equality mandate is gone. There cannot be any equality without classification. That is something I must say, that's an oxymoron. It's an oxymoron. Why I say it's an oxymoron? Classification is something which is a dead enemy of equality. By the word equality, we always imagine classlessness. No. Equality means equal treatments prevailing amongst the classes. That is equality. Now, without further ado, I will be making a short presentation so that you get something on the screen, because it's not like a seminar. Seminar, you get the speaker who's moving in front of you. He can imbibe his energy into you. But unfortunately, these trying times, I cannot actually impress so much upon you. So I will take the help of a presentation. I will be presenting 5 different cases. I will be presenting all the PDF files. All the PDF files I'll be presenting, and I think that will speak for itself. So if you kindly have the screen on, you will see there's a presentation running. Within a few minutes, we'll get the presentation on. Yes. I hope you can see the presentation, I guess. Right? Yes. So first and foremost, I would like to present this case, Uttar Pradesh Power Corporation Limited versus Ayodhya Prasad Mishra. Can we have a break from the photography, kindly, please? It's getting onto my concentration. Thank you. So, Uttar Pradesh Power Corporation Limited versus Ayodhya Prasad Mishra and another. You who are interested, you can take down the citation as well. This is 2008, 10th volume SCC, page number 139. Now, I will be referring to the paragraph 40 of the instant judgment. If you are taking notes, you can write it down. This is 2008, 10th volume SCC, page 139. Relevant portion is at paragraph 40. Right? So I'll get on to paragraph 40 straight away. Yes. Let's see. Here, I'm placing the paragraph. It is well settled that equals cannot be treated unequally, but it is equally well settled that unequals cannot be treated equally. treating of unequals as equals would as well offend the doctrine of equality enshrined in Articles 14 and 16 of the Constitution. The High Court was therefore right in holding that executive engineers placed in Category 1 must get priority and preference for promotion to the post of superintendent engineer over executive engineers found in Category 2. Actually, here what happened, the rule that was under challenge, it placed Category 1 and Category 2, both the kinds of the engineers on the same platform. They used to get the same benefits, they used to get the same perks, everything. So there was obviously, presumably, I mean, it's understandable, they were not very happy, they were not content with the matter. So there was this petition came up, and ultimately this was ordered. In fact, High Court had favored the petitioners, that is Ayodhya Prasad Mishra and others, with a verdict. State of UP came up in appeal before the Honorable Supreme Court, and State of UP's appeal is hereby rejected. You will see in this judgment at the end, the appeal gets rejected, and whatever the Allahabad High Court ordered, that was taken up as the law of the land. As they said, as their lordships there said, that it is equally well settled that unequals cannot be treated equally. Treating of unequals as equals would offend the doctrine of equality. Kindly see, I have also made a small note out there. Apex Court lays down that not only equals have to be treated equally, but also the unequals must necessarily be treated unequally in order to preserve the mandate of Article 14. So that's where we see the courts step in to protect the mandate of equality even in a negative tone. Now a question may arise. This is a rule, or in some matter I will also show you there are acts which have been struck down or modified, read down. But what about a policy decision? We all know policy decisions are basically pet of the legislatures, and they enjoy the parliamentary immunity of legislatures. They enjoy the immunity of the legislature's wisdom. So can a policy decision, if that policy decision as a matter of policy by the government, if a policy decision treats unequals equally, can it be struck down? The Honorable Supreme Court said yes, it can be struck down. How it can be struck down? This is perhaps the most important judgment, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. This is perhaps the most important judgment in the entire field of unequals being treated equally, in this field of the abrogation of Article 14. And that is the case of Bennett Coleman. Bennett Coleman's case. Kindly see, I am presenting it on the screen once again. Kindly take a note. This is a landmark case, and I would like to call it a pioneer case, because the judicial language was very clear, very straightforward. Their lordships in the Supreme Court had called a spade, and Honorable Supreme Court minced no words. I will just show the relevant portions of the judgments. I think you will get interested. Bennett Coleman and Company and others versus Union of India and others. That's the case. 1972, second volume SCC, 788 is the page number. 1972, second volume SCC, page number 788. I will be relying upon quite a few paragraphs. So as I refer, you can go on noting it down. First, I will, let me just offhand manner, I'm telling you, most of us know, but still, Bennett Coleman is the Times of India group. So this was a legal crusade taken up by Times of India in the year 1972, before in fact. So Bennett Coleman, I'll first go to paragraph number 59. Kindly come to paragraph number 59. This is the paragraph number 59 on your screen. I'm placing the relevant portions only which I have highlighted. According to the petitioners, this is the contention of the petitioner that we are talking about. According to the petitioner, there is no distinction made by the government between the dailies in Indian language and English dailies, and particularly big English dailies. Okay, I'll pause here for a moment. Let me tell you the facts of this case, so that will be a bit more enjoyable. Here, Government of India came out with a policy decision. What policy decision? To save newsprints. So what they did, they fixed a ceiling to all the newspapers that you will not be allowed to use X amount of, more than X amount of newsprints. You will not be allowed to use more than X amount of newsprints. So on that issue, the big dailies, the big English dailies, they joined hands. They said a vernacular or a middle-sized English daily, they run for 8, 9, 10 pages maximum. But we run for 13, 14 pages. Our circulation is also way bigger than them. So we need more newsprints. We cannot do with whatever ceiling that you are fixing for a vernacular. Obviously, a newspaper which is running for 8 pages will need X amount of newsprints. A newspaper which is running for 13, 14 pages, it may need X plus 5 amount of newsprints. So that was the bone of contention. That was the problem. That was the issue which the Honorable Apex Court was looking into. So the bone of contention for the petitioners, as it is clear from the screen, the government did not make any distinction between the needs of a big newspaper and a relatively smaller newspaper while making the newsprint policy for the country. So that was the bone of contention. Now let's come to the judgment once again. According to the petitioners, there is no distinction made by the government of India, government between dailies in Indian language and English dailies, and particularly big English dailies. So what happened? A big daily, obviously, as I said, according to the government, is taken to mean daily with a circulation of more than 50,000 copies. So obviously they needed more newsprints. Now, the average of their page level has been about 13. The medium English dailies have had an average page level of above 11. Of the 30 language dailies, 23 operate on an average page level below 10. So this was the contention, this was the facts on which the Honorable Court had, the Honorable Court was called upon to decide thereafter. The petitioners therefore contend that if the maximum number of pages is fixed at 10, the average page level of the big English and language dailies would come down to 9.8, and their page level would become more or less equal to the page level of medium dailies whose requirements are much less. It would therefore, in our view, amount to treating unequals equally and to benefit one type of daily at the cost of the other. So here the Supreme Court, after appreciating the problems canvassed by the petitioners, the Honorable Supreme Court comes to a preliminary observation or a preliminary conclusion that it would therefore, in our view, amount to treating unequals equally and to benefit one type of daily at the cost of the other. So this was what the Honorable Supreme Court was of the primary opinion. Right. So this is where we are, page 68, page 820. The petitioners therefore rightly emphasize that to equate the big English daily, which are in a class by themselves, with other dailies which need less than 10 pages, indicates negation of an equitable distribution and proves irrational treating of dailies. So here, kindly notice, kindly see, and kindly appreciate findings of the Honorable Court is this, that there exists a fundamental difference between the two classes of the newspapers, and the treatment by the government is irrational. Why? Because in order to equate the big English dailies which are in a class by themselves, with other dailies which need less than 10 pages indicates negation. Negation of what? Negation of an equitable distribution, and proves irrational treating of dailies. So kindly notice, firstly, the court was of the opinion that they were discriminatory. There was certain amount of discrimination. Now here the court is coming to another conclusion, that it is irrational as well. So we see unequals being treated equally, giving rise to discrimination, giving rise to irrationality. So these are the two things till now what we have found out from the observations of the Honorable Court. Now kindly come to para 69, the last portion of para 69. This is the court's verdict. This entails the court's final findings. The 10-page ceiling imposed affecting 22 big newspapers operating above 10-page level with approximate circulation of over 23 lakhs, that is more than 25% of the total circulation, is arbitrary and treats them equally with others who are unequal, irrespective of the needs of the requirements of the big dailies, and thus violates Article 14 of the Constitution. Now kindly see, till now Article 14 has been violated. Precisely this phrase was never used by the Honorable Supreme Court. It was saying that there is a discrimination, there is irrationality, but now it is calling a spade a spade. Kindly see, what does it say? I'm repeating once again. Circulation is circulation is arbitrary and treats them equally with others who are unequal. Treats them equally with others who are unequal, irrespective of the needs and requirements of the big dailies, and thus violates Article 14 of the Constitution. So nothing could have been more clear, more precise, more on the face. Here there was a need for classification. No classification was done. So without making that classification, when you devise a policy, or when you promulgate an act, or frame a rule, or come out with a notification or circular, that is bound to fail. Why? Because when there is a need of classification, if you are not classifying, then you are treating unequals equally. Equals have to be classified from the unequals. The equals have to be taken into consideration as a group, as a class. Unequals have to be taken into consideration as a group, as a class. Now, amongst the unequals, there might be thousands of classes, but they cannot come into the same bracket, the same parenthesis of the equals. That is the point which I want to score. So here, conclusion of the apex court, treating unequals equally violates Article 14 of the Constitution. Now, I will go back to page number 34, as I was telling you right now, that this is something where, just a moment, page number 34. We are dealing with policy decision. We are dealing with a policy decision. Kindly bear it in mind. This is a policy decision. This is not an act. This is not a rule, not a notification, not a circular. A notification or a circular can be easily overthrown. A rule, although a bit difficult, but can also be overthrown. An act, very difficult to overthrow, but yes, can be overthrown. But policy decision being overthrown, we are laying down a fundamental principle in the legal, in the legal arena of Bharata. In Bharatiya law, we are making a statement out here. Policy decision, despite of parliamentary supremacy, our judiciary accepts a policy decision can be negated, and that is here in paragraph 65. Kindly see. In our judgment, the policy of the government to limit all papers at 10 pages is arbitrary. It tends to treat unequals as equals and discriminates against those who, by virtue of their efficiency, standard and service, and because of their all India statute acquired a higher page level in 1957, whatever. So the thing is, the Honorable Supreme Court is saying that the judgment, in our judgment, the policy of the government, the policy itself is arbitrary. The policy of the government to limit all papers at page 10 is arbitrary. The policy itself is arbitrary. Why? Because it tends to treat unequals equally. It tends to treat the unequals as equals. So the basic policy is bad. If I come out with a law, if I come out with an act, a promulgation, an ordinance, a notification, a rule, a circular, whatever, if the underlying policy is gone, then everything goes. So here what we see, the actual supremacy of the constitution, which our Indian judiciary has time and again repeated, the supremacy of the constitution. It shows that the policy decision of the parliamentarily superior government can also be washed away, because it does not follow the tenets laid down by the Constitution of India, namely Article 40. Now, kindly do come to page 35 once. This is not page 35. This is yes, para 70. So I have, for your benefit, I'm just repeating. Para 59 I have referred. Para 68 I have referred. Para 69 I have referred. Para 65 I have referred. Now para 70. I intend to refer to para 72 lines. Yes. The impeached policy, my God, my goodness, kindly see. The impeached policy. So it was a policy which got impeached in the year 1972. So that was the strength of our judiciary. That is the strength of the Constitution. That is the level of our adherence. The impeached policy violates Article 14 because it treats newspapers which is not equally in assessing the needs and requirements of the newsprint. So by referring to para 70, I only wanted to bring home the point that even a policy decision can be done away with. It can be abrogated, negated. So even if it is a policy decision, I can always challenge it under the pretext of Article 14, and or for that matter of fact, any constitutional mandates. I can say that if this goes against the basic feature, or if this goes against the constitutional dicta, it is obviously liable to be quashed and set aside. Now, so that's what I made a note of it. Thus, the Apex Court clearly lays down, if unequals are treated equally, even a policy decision of the government which is otherwise untouchable can be impeached and or quashed, being violative of Article 14. So that is why I call this a pioneer judgment, not only a landmark judgment, it's a pioneer judgment, which in emphatic terms lays down, when the unequals are treated equally, then the mandate of Article 14 stands offended. That stands offended. Whenever we do this, it stands offended. Article 14 gets violated, it becomes arbitrary, it becomes unsustainable. So either it has to go, or it has to be read down in such a manner so that the constitutionality is preserved. Obviously, the courts would always try to read down and save the constitutionality of a legislature-made law if there is any scope or possibility. But while reading down, the court obviously and necessarily, they cure that impugned provision of the defect, that they cure that mischief. So the people are not offended. I mean, the litigants or the sufferers under that draconian law, they do not suffer. So that way one can obviously read down a judgment. I will also come to this reading down. That will be the fag end of the of this deliverance. Now, these were the basic tenets as shown by Bennett Coleman. Now, if you come to the third judgment, I'll tell you, the third judgment is basically, it is known as, I mean, it is famous for different matters. It is famous for different purposes. It is not famous for unequals being treated unequally. But in this judgment as well, there are portions and provisions, rather there are portions and tenets which go to show that how effectively Article 14 can be used. So this go to show how effectively Article 14 can be used on its own accord. This is the celebrated judgment of Indra Sohani. Indra Sohani's judgment everybody knows, but it is known for a different issue altogether. In our college lives, we used to dub it as the gods of service jurisprudence had written the judgment of Indra Sohani. It's a 700 and odd pages judgment, but it was mainly due to the service jurisprudence. That was Indra Sohani's judgment was famous. But today I will cite Indra Sohani for a different purpose and for a different motto altogether. I'm once again presenting the judgment of Indra Sohani. Yes. I have divided the judgment into two parts, 750 pages document. It would have been very problematic for me to present. That's why. Achha, kindly take down the citation, those of you who are taking it down. This is 1992 supplementary SCC, supplementary volume SCC, third volume, 217, page number 217, 1992 supplementary 3 SCC 217. In Indra Sohani's case, there are two places where I'm going to put my reliance. One is a subsidiary reliance and the other is a direct reliance. Why I say subsidiary reliance? In the Indra Sohani's case, the Honorable Apex Court had put their confidence on an International Court of Justice judgment delivered by the International Court of Justice, and the portion of Judge Tanaka, who once again brings out the Aristotelian philosophy of res distributiva and res retributiva. That one I will first come down to show. Here, this is the PDF taken from India Kanun. Kindly do not bank on the paragraph numbers that's showing on the screen. I will give you the actual paragraph numbers. This will be paragraph 261 in SCC. Paragraph 261 in SCC. And this will be, here the paragraph will be 407 or something like that. Yes. So now kindly see. This is, they are saying this is page, this is 407, but this is actually 261, para 261 of SCC, right? Now I'm placing this judgment. In the words of Judge Tanaka of the International Court of Justice, the principle is that what is equal is to be treated equally. What is different is to be treated differently. Namely, proportionately to the factual difference. This is what was indicated by Aristotle as justitia commutative and justitia distributiva. That is retributive and distributive theory of justice. The principle of equality before the law does not mean the absolute equality. Namely, equal treatment of men without regard to individual concrete circumstances, but it means the relative equality. Very, very, very important, I must say. It means the relative equality, namely the principle to treat equally what are equal and unequally what are unequal. To treat unequal matters differently according to their inequality is not only permitted but also required. So I should say these are actually golden words. These are actually golden words which have been adopted and accepted by the Honorable Supreme Court, and now this forms a part of the Indian jurisprudence as well. Kindly notice the second paragraph that I've highlighted once again. The principle of equality before the law does not mean absolute equality. Now today, say for example, I say here I have an august audience, all of who are lingually different. So I just float a proposition that today I will, for the first 4 lines, I will use English. Next 2 lines, I will use Bengali. Next 2 lines, I will use Hindi. Next 2 lines, I will use Gujarati. Next 2 lines, I will use Nepali. Next 2 lines, I will use Ohmiya. Next 2 lines, I will use Konkani, so on and so forth. Will that be actually an equality? Or does the doctrine of equality makes us do that? Of course not. This is nothing. Nothing is mindless. The law does not ask us to do an impossibility. Nothing is mindless. So what is needed? It is needed that I present the whole thing in such a fashion that it becomes understandable to everybody. So here, the linguistic difference, in case of this linguistic difference, what I can adopt is a common language. If today I speak in Hindi, that also would have been a common language. But all on a sudden, if I say, Nepali ma kura garnus, I will speak in Nepali now, henceforth. Will it do? No, of course not. Of course not. So that is what I'm intending to say. It has to be, the equality before law does not mean absolute equality. It does not mean absolute equality. It means a relative equality. You have to be very careful, cautious, and fair to judge that relative equality. One must find out equality amongst the unequals by treating them unequally. Perhaps once again I'm tempted to get back to my clarion call of going back to the Vedas. Equal be your equality, the last tenet. Samano mastu bho mano yathava susahasati. Equal be your equality. Samani bha akuti, samani hridayani bha. So that is what it is. Equal be your equality. Here also you see, principle of equality before the law does not mean absolute equality, namely equal treatment of men without regard to individual concrete circumstances. But it means relative equality, namely the principle to treat equally what are equals and unequally what are unequals. Today, if somebody is very, very, he's suffering for want of water, he wants a glass of water, I go and feed him a hale and hearty plate of chow mein. Will that do? That won't. So that is what it is. Now let us come down to the next paragraph of this judgment itself. That will be, just a moment. Yes, kindly see that was my noting which I wanted to share with you all. As we had already discussed earlier, the theory of the unequals to be treated unequally was championed by Aristotle. Here SC2 affirmatively cites the same. Anyway, so now I will come to the second part of the judgment. And you see, this is paragraph 415. This is once again very important. Paragraph 415 of the same Indra Sahani judgment. I just bifurcated it into 2 parts because it was a very lengthy judgment. 415, I am placing it before you. It is no longer necessary to emphasize the equality contemplated by Article 14 and other cognate articles, including Articles 15.1, 16.1, 29.2 and 38.2 of the Constitution, is secured not only when equals are treated equally, but also when unequals are treated unequally. Conversely, when unequals are treated equally, the mandate of equality before law is breached. Kindly see. Kindly see. In one single breath, their lordships in the Honorable Supreme Court had made 2 very, very important statements. What are those 2 statements? Number 1, Article 14 has been related to 15.1, 16.1, 29.2 and 38.2. So today it won't be very far-fetched if I contest that if you offend Article 14, you are offending Article 15, 16, 29 and 38 as well. Equality mandate is the superset, and all the others are the subsets to that superset. The mandate is a mandate, and the others are rights. So that is what is very important to see, very important to notice and appreciate. It's saying that all these Article 14 and other cognate articles, including articles such and such, is secured not only when equals are treated equally. So Article 14 and other cognate articles will be secured when not only when equals are treated equally, but also when unequals are treated unequally. So kindly see how far the root of this banyan tree goes. Today unequals are treated unequally, Article 14 gets abridged. Rather, I would build up unequals being treated unequally. There is a discrimination. Discrimination gives birth to discrimination. Discrimination gives birth to irrationality. Irrationality to arbitrariness. Arbitrariness means abridgment of Article 14. Abridgment of Article 14 means abridgment of other cognate articles. So basically a whole bunch of constitutional rights fail if unequals are treated equally. I do not wish to go into the I.C. Goloknath, then A.K. Gopalan, from that Keshavananda Bharati, then you have Minerva Mills, then RLEK, Consumer Society's case, Kyoto Holon versus Zachilu. I will not go into those. Those are basically the bunch of cases which have already defined the more plausible structure of Article 14. But unfortunately, unequality as a mandate is very seldom touched upon. Even there are occasions where I have seen that it is considered to be totally foreign an aspect. Anyway, now kindly see. So in 415, paragraph 415 in Indraswamy versus Union of India, the Supreme Court not only hints and reflects, but also it establishes that when unequals are treated equally, not only the mandate under Article 14 is abrogated, but also the sanctity of the constitutional provisions of the other cognate articles, they also stand mutilated. So this is where we stand. This is the ramification. This is the ramification of the provision of Article 14 and the equality mandate. Now, taking a cue from this particular instance itself, taking a cue from this particular judgment itself, the Honorable Rajasthan High Court, on the same line, the division bench of Honorable Rajasthan High Court had come up with another matter. I'll just come to that matter. I'll have a gulp of water. I think you will excuse me for this. Yes, Rajasthan High Court, in another matter, the division bench of Rajasthan High Court, the state of Rajasthan versus Khemchand Sharma and another. Here, I will once again present, and you will see it on your screen itself. Yes. This is the Rajasthan. Once again, I'm sorry to give you all this India Kanoon's document. Unfortunately, WLC, that's the Western Law Reports. I do not have WLC in my library. So unfortunately, I have to do with this. This is the citation is 1992, second volume, WLC 618. WLC may be a bit unknown in the eastern part of Bharata, but WLC is a very, very renowned journal, especially in the Rajasthan High Court. It's in the Rajasthan High Court. I have seen WLC stacked up on the tables. Unfortunately, I don't have any access to that. This is the WLC citation. Kindly do come to page 44 of no, this is not page 44. This is page 13. Page 13. Kindly come to this. Kindly see what the Rajasthan High Court talks about. Honorable Division Bench of the Rajasthan High Court reiterates that the principle that Article 14 stands offended not only when the equals are treated unequally, but also when the unequals are treated equally. How? See. Thus, it is clear that if two posts carry the same type of work, when all things are equal and all relevant considerations on the basis of which pay is to be granted the same, the persons holding identical posts cannot be treated differently. The fallout of this principle is that if one post is superior to the other post, then the superior post must be given superior pay scale. This difference is irresistible because if one acts otherwise, it will result in treating unequals as equals, and therefore this will be a violation of Article 14 of the Constitution. As stated above, the principle of equality, as enshrined in Article 14 of the Constitution, is violated not only when equals are treated as unequals, but when unequals are also treated as equals. And when there is a violation of Article 14 of the Constitution, the courts do interfere either by giving directions or by issuing a writ of mandamus. It is true that the writ of mandamus cannot be issued directing the legislature to legislate. It is further true that subordinate legislation is framed by executive under Article 309 of the Constitution. When the executive has framed or carved out certain pay scales by a subordinate legislation under Article 309 of the Constitution, but in implementing them, their act is unjust, unreasonable, or arbitrary. That is, it is violative of Article 14 and 16 of the Constitution, as the principles of equal pay for equal work is not followed and the unequals are treated as equals. The courts have right to interfere, and they do interfere in such matters, such authoritative words. I have chosen this matter to bring before you for the sole purpose that perhaps this paragraph, as I have quoted right now, perhaps this paragraph is reflecting what Bennett Coleman said and what Indra Sahani said. As Bennett Coleman had shown that, thank you, as Bennett Coleman has shown that one can even strike down a policy decision, as Indra Sahani had shown, Article 14 can be completely entangled with Article 15, 16, 29, 38, so on and so forth, all the cognate articles. Here, it is perhaps, it's a synthesis of these two judgments. I'm not saying that these two judgments, this judgment was after Indra Sahani, because their timelines are one and the same. But anyway, if you look into it, kindly see what it states. Here I am. As stated, kindly see, as stated above, the principle of equality is enshrined in Article 14 of the Constitution, is violated not only when the equals are treated as unequals, but when unequals are treated as equals, and when there is a violation of Article 14 of the Constitution, the courts do interfere either by giving directions or by issuing a writ of mandamus. Now kindly see, this is once again very, very important. In case of all of us who are practicing writ, we know if you choose a mistaken writ, for example, when you need a certiorari, you pray for a mandamus, your remedy is gone for a toss. So we know that. Now you see here the court expresses its inability, and at the same time the court expresses its competence, its potence, I should say. as the court expresses its inability that no, we cannot direct the legislature to legislate, in the same breath, the court says, but we have enough power to interfere and we will interfere. That is the beauty of this judgment. That is the beauty of this judgment, I must say. Here we see court in one hand says, kindly read it with me once again. It is true that a writ of mandamus cannot be issued directing the legislature to legislate. It is further true that subordinate legislation is framed by executive under 309 of the Constitution. When the executive has framed or carved out certain pay scales by a subordinate legislation under Article 309 of the Constitution, but in implementing them, their act is unjust, unreasonable, or arbitrary, it is violative of Article 14 and 16 of the Constitution, as the principle of equal work and equal pay is not followed and the unequals are treated as equals. The courts have a right to interfere, and they do interfere in such matters. Kindly see the wordings. The courts have a right to interfere. It is not that the courts have a duty to interfere or the courts have the power to interfere. It should be interfered as a matter of right. It should be interfered as a matter of right. So that is the potence of this judgment. And that is why it stands out from the crowd, in my humble opinion. According to me, in my humble opinion, it stands out from the crowd because it conveys, as I've already said, it conveys that spirit and letter of the principles of justice, that justice should not only be done, but it must necessarily seem to have been done. Justice cannot be done. You cannot do justice very surreptitiously. Justice has to be audibly done. It has to be an act with a boom and twang. That is what because if justice is done, then the justice is perpetrated. As per the wordings of Edward Coke, he said, if justice is done, justice is perpetrated. If somebody is seen doing justice, then the offenders will think twice before committing an offense. And the persons, the laymen, they will be very happy that yes, we have justice. They will have peace in their minds. So that is why justice should not only be done, but seem to have been done. Now, this is the state of Rajasthan judgment now. The latest matter on this issue, I would make a small introduction of it before I I go on to the latest matter on this issue. This latest matter on this issue happens to be in relation to a judgment delivered by a constitutional tribunal of West Bengal, a taxation tribunal, which has similar and equal position of that of a single bench of the High Court. The full bench had presided over the matter and the full bench came to the conclusion. The question was, a particular section 2212 DA was under challenge of the VAT Act, the Value Added Tax Act. I very humbly and with all my humility, I submit, I had the privilege, I had the honor to address the honorable court while appearing for the petitioners, and I had pleaded on this line of unequals and unequality. The erudite and the eloquent judgment that came out, I will share it with all of you right now, which unequivocally stated and with all its gusto and might, it showed what is to be done and what should have been done. And it actually corrected the course, and how it corrected the course. I'm just giving you a very brief factual backdrop. It is like this: whenever a person files a return under the VAT Act, whatever purchases he has made, he is supposed to get input tax credit. We call it in short ITC. He is supposed to get an input tax credit over it. If his purchases are genuine, if his invoices are genuine, he is supposed to get an input tax credit. That means whatever is output tax, that will be deducted from his input tax. The input tax will be deducted from his output tax. Say for example, today I buy an article with rupees 100, tomorrow I sell it at rupees 200. 100 rupees I buy, on that 10% tax, 110 I pay. On 200 I sell, 10%, that is 20 rupees I have to pay, but I have to actually pay 20 minus 10 rupees. Why? Because at the purchase level, I have already paid that 10 rupees. So that's the concept of input tax credit. Now kindly see what happened. The state legislature of Bengal, they came up with a proposition and a provision of law. This is an act. Kindly bear it in mind. This is not a rule, not a notification, not a regulation. This is an act. They came up with a provision of this act. They said that if my seller from whom I have purchased the goods at my purchase point, if he has not shown it in his returns, that is, if he has suppressed that sale, my input tax credit will go for a tossing. So that was the proposition, very draconian proposition, in my humble submission. Now what happened? I rose this question, I took this question before the honorable bench, that there can be three types of people. One, doing collusion with the seller. Today I collude with my seller. I ask him, Mr. So-and-so, give me the goods. I will take the input tax credit, and after a few days, you don't pay the amount and you get your registration certificate cancelled. Collusion. There is a second class as well. 99% of the dealers fall in that second class. The selling dealer does this to benefit himself, and the purchasing dealer has no clue. This provision did not make any differentiation between those types of dealers and these types of dealers. This was the factual backdrop. Now once again, I'll go back to my presentation, and I will show you the judgment itself. This judgment will be very shortly reported. I do not know in the lockdown whether it has already been reported or not. So I'm giving you the certified, I'm showing you from the certified copy. The judgment is known as Alok Kundu versus JC City, that is Joint Commissioner Commercial Taxes, Howrah Charge and others. RN number 1089 of 2018. RN number 1089 of 2018, you can see, right? Very well. So now, the Honorable Chairman's judgment I will refer to. There were three different judgments in this case, three separate judgments, but three supporting judgments, corroborative judgments, and each of these three honorable members of the tribunal, they had found that the act, the provision concerned, was discriminatory, and that is why they had made their own judgments. Three different judgments they had written, but I will straight away go to the Honorable Chairman's judgment, where the matter will be very clear. It's very clearly mentioned out there. Kindly come to page 44 of this judgment. Page 44. This is where the judgment starts. Further argument is that in terms of the impugned provisions, unequals are being treated equally, which is also a violation of principles of equality before the law envisaged under Article 14 of the Constitution. It was contended that there could quite well be as cases where the selling dealers and purchasing dealers entered into sham and fake transactions, giving rise to mere paper transactions for claim of ITC. But in majority of cases, there is no such collusion between the selling and the purchasing dealers. So here the point of fact is instated, and the argument on which the judgment, on this part of the judgment is based on, is also instated. Argument was provisions, this impugn provision, unequals were being treated equally, and violations of principles of equality, obviously, as I had contended just now. So there, the Honorable Constitution Tribunal, it accepts that there are two classes, and it also painfully reflects that there is some problem with the provision. Now I will once again travel a bit, and this will be at page 46. Here, kindly see, very in a very erudite manner, in a very succinct manner, the whole thing has been juxtaposed. So, without adverting to details of the further arguments raised on behalf of the petitioners and the revenue, it can very well be said that the impugn provision suffers to some extent from arbitrariness and unreasonableness. Kindly note. Here the court comes to the unmistakable conclusion that there is to some extent arbitrariness and unreasonableness as it is manifest on the records. And here the Honorable Court also takes up the cue from Indra Sahani's case and holds that unequals had been treated equally in this case, hence the provision was arbitrary and unreasonable to that extent. Argument advanced on behalf of the petitioners that the unequals are being treated equally has substance and merit. And in this context, what the Honorable Apex Court has held in paragraph 415 in the case of Indra Sahani versus Union of India is all the more important to be borne in mind. Indra Sahani's case, paragraph 415, I have already discussed in this August gathering. So that was completely adopted and accepted by the Honorable Constitutional Tribunal, the Taxation Tribunal. And their lordships, in the full bench of the Honorable Taxation Tribunal, they were at one with the Honorable Supreme Court and at one with the records of the proceedings that there were a few glitches due to which this provision may suffer to an extent with arbitrariness and unreasonableness. Thereafter, now kindly come to page 48. I'm going to page 48. Yes. From the above discussions, now here comes the verdict. Here comes the verdict, and here comes the ratio for the verdict. From the above discussion, there is no escape from coming to the conclusion that the impugn provision suffers from arbitrariness and unreasonableness. So unreasonableness and arbitrariness are established. It is also found that the impugn provision does not meet the constitutional principle of equality. Kindly appreciate the Honorable Tribunal, the Honorable Full Bench of the Constitutional Tribunal. It is holding that since the provision suffers from unreasonableness and arbitrariness, it does not meet the constitutional principle of equality, which is nothing but Article 14. The question is whether the said provision is to be struck down as unconstitutional or can be saved in any other manner. To be more specific, whether the impugn provision can be saved by reading it down, or in other words, by way of reducing the scope of its interpretation, that can be given to this provision. It cannot be contemplated that the intention of the legislature was to treat both the honest and the dishonest dealers alike. So this is exactly where we see the doctrine of equality, the equality mandate Article 14, everything coming into the picture, but not through the door that we already know, but through that unknown door, or rather untraversed, hitherto untraversed door of unequals being treated equally. As the last line from the erudite judgment, it shows it cannot be contemplated that the intention of the legislature was to treat both the honest and the dishonest dealer. Right? So here we see it is there where we are heading to, that the legislature's intention couldn't have been to treat the dealers alike, both honest and dishonest. The Honorable Full Bench of the Constitutional Tribunal thus pronounces the impugned provision to be arbitrary and unreasonable, as offending Article 14 as it treats unequals equally. Now, on the next, yes, the question that poses itself for consideration is whether, in terms of the impugned provision, this constitutional demand has been met or is seen as breached and or violated. Having regard to the dictum of the Honorable Apex Court in the case of Indra Sahani versus Union of India, we have no hesitation to hold that the impugned provision has failed to meet the constitutional demand of the equal treatment before the law. So there we go once again, as we see, being satisfied with the arbitrariness of the provision. The succinct judgment, the succinctness of the judgment revolves on the issue that arbitrariness has been found out, unreasonableness has been found out. Why? Because unequals are being treated equally. Kindly have a more keen look on this. Arbitrariness and unreasonableness are the grounds with which we generally associate the philosophy of ultra vires. But in this judgment, very beautifully, arbitrariness and arbitrariness and unreasonableness, they have paved way for the reading down of the provision of the law. Here, this provision was read down, and the mischief of this provision was cured by reading it down in such a way so that without any inquiry, an inquiry was read into the provision, without any inquiry, without satisfaction of mind that this person was colluding with the other, nobody can use this 2212 DA against a general person. That is now the position of the law, and that is all thanks to the erudite judiciary of the West Bengal Taxation Tribunal of the full bench that was sitting at that point of time and delivering this erudite judgment. Now, if we come back to the last limb of our today's deliberation, what have we seen? I'll just sum up in a nutshell. What have we seen today? First case that I discussed was Ayodhya Prasad Mishra's case. Second was Bennett Coleman. In my humble opinion, this is the sheet anchor. This is the best possible example of this case is the best possible example of the explanation of the doctrine. Third, Indra Sahani, a totally different angle, but yet it's a unique case and it's very important as well. Fourth, the Rajasthan High Court's judgment. And fifth, the latest one in this field is the Honorable West Bengal Taxation Tribunal's judgment, the 3-member bench judgment. These are the 5 judgments that I have already made use of. Now, with all this, I open the house for questionnaires.
If you have any question regarding this, you can write only the word question in the chat box. Mr. Bhattacharya will get back to you one by one.
Mr. Saim Aziz, will this judgment of Indra Sahani be applicable under GST Act relating to 16.2? See, sir, I'll tell you something. GST Act has got nothing to do with 16.2. 16.2, Article 16.2 and GST, I do not think that goes hand in hand, isn't it? Because it is for equal work, equal pay. And GST, I don't think will go hand in hand with that. Anything else in the question back? Anshul Narayan has given additional case citation. Yes, 1993. That's Indra Sahani's another citation. Reshma has said feedback form. We don't have a provision for feedback form, Reshma. You can comment on our YouTube link or the YouTube channel we have. This webinar is being recorded. After suitable video edit, once the team completes it, it will be available on the YouTube channel itself. You can put your comments there.
Yes, there's a Facebook page, there's a LinkedIn page. You can, if you want to really get the feedback, then go to our Facebook page, and we would request you to like the page and write a review. And also, you can give us a review in Google. As of now, we don't have a feedback form, but that's an extremely good suggestion. From the next webinar, we will try to incorporate that. Thank you so much.
Somnath Rai Chaudhary has referred us with a question. Mr. Somnath Rai Chaudhary, can you kindly unmute yourself, come forward, because the webinar is being recorded. So I would like to have you on the dais itself. Kindly unmute yourself and come forward. And kindly read your own question, kindly.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
I just missed when you were giving deliberation. I just missed one point. You were talking about something. I'm just referring to Alok Kundu's case. You were
Yes.
talking about some inquiry to be made against dealers, something like that. What is given in the judgment? So I just, since I missed out, so I'm just seeking a clarification.
Read down into that until and unless some findings, some positive findings have been made that the dealer is a delinquent dealer or the dealer is in hand in glove with the purchasing dealer, no application of section 2212 DA will be made, and that necessarily entails an inquiry on the part of the department concerned. And that's why I said the department, the phenomenon of inquiry has been read into the existing provision.
No, it is specifically observed in the judgment.
The judgment says that until and unless you have a positive findings against the dealer, then you
Findings where? Findings where?
Anywhere.
In the assessment order.
Yes.
In the
Assessment order or a suo motu division order, whatever it might be. There should be a proceeding. That is it.
So inquiry may be the background of that observation, right?
Yes. That is why I said the provision of inquiry has been read into.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Vikram Mahata.
Does anyone else have any question? Thanks a lot for the encouraging words you have written in the chat box.
Good
Yes,
evening,
sir.
sir.
Please go on.
So my question is that considering the creamy layer system was, abolished or eliminated through the Indra Sawhney case, but now recent times in 2018, the Jarnil Singh case, which also reiterated the M. Nagaraj case also. So in both these cases, it was held that the creamy layer system should again be re-established, reapplied to the SC, STs and also the backward classes. But since the Indra Sawhney case was passed by a comparatively, major bench, like 9 judges, so whether that Jarnil Singh verdict to that respect will still be followed or not? That's my question, sir.
Right. So thanks. Yes. Thanks, Namrata, for your question. First and foremost, I would like to talk about the doctrine of overruling or doctrine of prospective doctrine of overruling. Why I say this? Because in case of any overruling, or whenever we say that judgment is not a good law anymore, we presume the facts to be exactly the same. As far as Jarnail Singh's case is concerned and Indra Sahani's case is concerned, neither Jarnail Singh eclipses Indra Sahani, nor Indra Sahani can undo Jarnail Singh. Why I say this? See, as I just pointed out in this seminar, Indra Sahani's case, we all used to say that it's written by the gods of service jurisprudence. I think you will be at one with me on this. It was basically a pathfinder in the service jurisprudence. It was never known as an Article 14 case at all, right? So it was basically Article 16 being interpreted, and a somewhat exceptional, I should say, auxiliary lighting was provided by the Article 14 on the main table of Article 16. Now what happened here? Once Indra Sahani's judgment, I took these two paragraphs out, and you see these two paragraphs had something to contribute on Article 14, simpliciter, like without going into anything else, right? So similarly, if one can find out that portion from the Jarnail Singh's judgment, which you say it stands abrogated. I don't say whether Jarnail Singh's verdict to that respect can still be followed. Obviously, yes, because since that nothing can eclipse fully, nothing can eclipse the previous one fully. So similarly here, if I can today quote Indra Sahani for Article 14, obviously Jarnail Singh can affirmatively cited on those issues on which it has not been abrogated. Do you get my point?
Yes, so that means like it will depends on the
Yes,
case to case
absolutely.
basis.
Because if you want
Right.
to, yes, if you want to today, if you want to make use of Jarnail Singh, today I'll tell you, if for example, Shahbanu case, this one, not Shahbanu, that probably this Justice Kehar's judgment. Tell me, Shairabanu or Shahbanu? Shairabanu or Shahbanu? Sritopa, please help me out. Shairabanu or Shairabanu? Yes,
Shairabanu case.
Shairabanu, yes. Shairabanu's case. Shairabanu's case. Have you seen Justice Noriman's? I mean, he was scathing. McDowell's case, he has simply thrown out McDowell's case from the window. Have you read the judgment? The diction of the judgment. Have you read it? At one point of time, it reads that it is no use of saying that it does not bind me, where you have a ratio of 5 judges bench in your teeth. This is what Noriman writes in that judgment. So there also, but still, McDowell has its own application. Rajwala has its own application. Your teeth. This is what. So similarly, all the judicial promulgations, all these judicial efforts, all these efforts of making out a law, it does not go in vain ever. It will have its own application in its own sweet aspect. You will get the facts to get Jarnail Singh in, right, Namrata?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Namanchal, please.
Okay, it seems Mr. Himal Kanti Ganguly has a question.
Hi, Bodhan. This was a very good presentation that I have come across, and I'm not an advocate, I'm not a law person, but I have this question that gender equality or gender inequality rather is now a problem that plagues this planet a lot. And my question, although we have moved forward a lot, there are a lot of laws in place. Practically, such a thing is still far from where we want to achieve. So could you enlighten us on that, how Indian law is treating it, and how do we stand, what do we stand with the rest of the world?
Thank you very much for your kind question. And just for the purpose of the audience knowledge and information, I would just now tell that my dear friend Dr. Himal Kanti Ganguly, he is one of those who's associated with the COVID research, and he is one of those who's actively participating in the trial of the vaccinations and making of the vaccines. Anyway, now Himal, since you are not a lawman but a layman, as you said,
Right.
let me answer you. Let me answer. Try to put your answers through on an issue which is not very legal. not in legal terms. I won't quote sections or quote articles so that the answer is more approachable for you, right?
Yep.
Look, in these cases, I would say, let us go back to the basics. You know, my clarion call has always been back to Vedas. So I will once again go back to the Vedas. My namesake, or rather, I am the namesake of Bodhayana, who actually wrote the Pythagoras theorem. He had his Griha Sutra. And from that Griha Sutra, and not only Bodhayana, there were other historic and Vedic references as well, where you saw that this society of ours, it did not have any caste or creed, neither it had any gender discrimination. Like why I say this, caste or creed, actually a person who had taken up education, he was given a sacred thread known as Janayu or Poite in Bengali. It was not Brahmins, it was not Kshatriya, it was not Shudra, it was not Vaishya. It was any person who took up this thread, symbolized who were students, who were being educated. And we will be astonished to know even the girls had their Upanayana, or the ceremony of this sacred thread ceremony. Why did they have it? They were known as Brahmavadinis. Just to show that they were students and their age of marriage was not before 28 years. Kindly imagine 8,500 years ago, people getting married at 28, girls getting married at 28. They were known as Brahmavadinis, and there were the others were known as Sadyavadus. So if you can actually, the answer to your question lies, if you can actually, open your heart, if you can actually, or rather if we can actually open our hearts, we can actually let go of all the prejudices that we do have. I don't think gender equality will be such a big issue. It's not such a big issue. Today, if I can actually arrange a sacred thread ceremony for my daughter, then only I will be in a position to say something on this. Otherwise, I also become one of those people who, perpetuate the oppression. So that will be it, Himal. Thank you. Mr. Narayan. Mr. Narayan has a question. Do you think, Mr. Narayan, kindly come up on the dais, please, and repeat your question so that I can have your good face on the seminar table.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Please.
Good evening, Bodhayan.
Good evening, Anshul. Please go on with your question.
My question is, there has been certain amendment in the Citizenship Act in the month of December 2019.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, absolutely. Go on.
See, according to Article 14 is not confined to the citizens of this country only. It gives benefit of equality to any person within the territory of India and even to a foreigner.
Right.
So do you think the Citizenship Amendment Act needs to pass the Article 14 test?
See, if there is a challenge on the issue of Article 14, then whether we think it is necessary or not, it will have to undergo the test of Article 14, right? So if today there is a challenge on the ground of Article 14, the courts will obviously, with the touchstone of its own constitutional reforms and own constitutional paraphernalial lines and outlines, they will test it, whether it is viable with the Article 14 or not. But it will be a totally different question if you ask me whether what's my opinion on it, whether it passes the Article 14 tests or not. In my opinion, it's absolutely fine. I don't think it has anything anything to be afraid of, that it's not going to pass Article 14 test. So
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Anshul, for your question. Thanks a lot. Priya Gupta, thank you for your wish. Thank you for your wish. And once again, with my folded hands, I do apologize for the initial problems that we had faced and for the disruption. Actually, in these situations, connections and internets are not within our hands. Despite one's best effort, we cannot guarantee
Right.
only whether it passes the.
But we are extremely very happy by the way you have explained.
This is my, yes, absolutely, sir.
Hello.
This is my.
Am I audible? Fantastic. It had been an outstanding session. Beautiful session.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. You being my staunchest ally, you will always praise me.
You have done justice
Thank
to
you,
Article
thank you,
40.
Anshul.
You
Thanks,
have
sir.
done justice
Thanks
to
a lot.
Article 40. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
We have a very
Thanks, sir.
responsive audience today. It really helps us to do better. We have a very responsive audience today. Thank you so much. If anyone else has any question,
Does the CCA
I
violate
don't know
the
whether
basic feature of
what
the
I have
secularism?
said was
No, sir, I do not think so. I do not think so because CCA, the Citizenship Amendment Act, as far as my humble knowledge goes, sir, firstly and foremostly, I would like to mention one thing. Secularism
No,
was not
I
the
don't.
not one of the firsts in our constitution, although it is a basic feature of our constitution. Of course, it's a
Oh.
basic feature of our constitution. As far as the CCA Act is concerned, if one goes through it, it is very clear on one aspect that it is basically a result of an inquiry. Now, the only thing that is
Yes.
to be seen, it's a plain and simple inquiry procedure. Without going into the castes and creed, if I say it's a inquiry procedure based upon certain documentations. Now, one question may arise that whether that documentation is reasonable or
Yes.
not. Second question may arise whether this is religion specific or not. Sir, this is not religion specific because many number of Hindus
Yes.
have also been bearing the brunt of it, as in Assam we have already seen. So this is not religion specific. Firstly, so there is no question of hitting the doctrine of secularity. Secondly, as far as it goes down, whether this is at all, whether this is reasonable or not, that is a question that can be taken into consideration while the matter is taken up by the court. But as far as my knowledge is concerned, or as far as my opinion is concerned, sir, I do not think that it's unreasonable. Because today, if somebody asks you to provide with certain proofs that of certain fact, especially if it revolves around the matter of staying in a country or not, by staying in one particular country, obviously we get a bundle of rights, we get a bundle of securities, we get a bundle of things that we use for ourselves. So, I mean, in lieu of that, in return to that, one can obviously ask this much, that whether you have certain documents with you or not. Now, whether these documents are reasonable or non-reasonable, that is the question of perception. According to, sir, my perception, I do not think these are unreasonable documents.
Yes.
Sir, thank you for your question, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Very nicely put
Thank you.
and said.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I would like to say something. I have a question. Don't you think the classification must be founded on an intelligible differentiator,
Absolutely, that is
which
the
distinguishes person or thing that are grouped together from
absolutely.
the other who had been left out?
That is what I was trying to establish. See, the doctrine of equality, Article 14, has two phases. One phase is equals have to be treated equally. The other phase is unequals treated unequally. Now, equals being treated equally means there is a classification. Now the question comes whether this classification is in accordance with an intelligible differentiator or not. Second question comes whether this goes for the furtherance of the objective of the act or not, this classification. So these two facets are basically with the facet of equality mandate. But as far as unequality mandate is concerned, like what I am talking about, that unequals being treated unequally, that means there is no classification at all, where there should have been a classification. When there is a classification, I tell you that
Right.
these questions can be asked to see whether the classification is good or bad. But when there is no classification, in Bennett and Coleman, there was no classification. A small daily and a big daily, both given 1 kg of newsprint. Khatam. Obviously, that's no classification.
Absolutely.
In 2212 DA, one dealer is colluding with the seller and taking the revenue out of the government coffer. The other one, he doesn't know anything about it. He himself is getting duped. Treating the same way. There is no classification at all. So this is what I wanted to. Thanks, Anshu.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Shupriyo Rai, for the question answer sessions here on CAA. Very well. I will keep it in mind. If you are there in my LinkedIn channel, you can LinkedIn portal platform, you can simply drop a small message out there so that it remains here. Otherwise, it may get out because this chat portion, I cannot save this. Amit Vikram Mahota, one of the best presentation ever made. Thank you, Mr. Mahota. Thanks a lot. That's very encouraging. Thank you. So we have already crossed the time, I see. And thank you, Mr. Narayan. I will call a close. Thank you, Mr. Roy. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ron. Thank you, Mr. Yes, Mr. Dev is there. Please. Justice Dev is here.
Yes. Sir, we would like to hear a few words from you.
I have heard with rapt attention as to what Mr. Bodhan has said and some of the questions put by the audience. Regarding the question regarding the CIA, it is a controversial issue. We don't want to dwell much on this issue. One thing is that it has been challenged. It can be challenged on the ground of discrimination, as a particular religious sect has been left out. This is one aspect. The other aspect that throughout the ages, or for at least for a few decades, the minorities in Bangladesh, Afghanistan and Pakistan had to face hardship. And they are willing to come back to India for certain reasons, for protection of their lives. And this act has been enacted to give protection to those unfortunate persons. This can be argued that this act has been made as by way of reasonable classification, having regard to having direct nexus to the object. These are the two aspects that are to be decided by the Apex Code, since lots of applications have been made therein. So it cannot be straight away stated that it is discriminated. Two aspects are to be considered vis-a-vis. And I have heard at length what Mr. Badayat Bhattacharya has said. He has thoroughly read the subject relating to right to equality. Yes, he emphasizes on the question of whether unequal should be treated equally or whether equal should be treated unequally. And he is referring to a series of judgments here that unequals cannot be treated equally and similarly equals cannot be treated unequally. And this is very absorbing discussion. I had problems as the connection went off I didn't have the link. It went off quite off and on. But overall, it's true, Mr. Bhattacharya. Thank you a lot. And thanks the audience also. But I would have been happy if Mr. Shunjit Majumdar and Manush Pal had said something before the audience and before us.
Learned Mr. Pal has already made his contribution by asking the question, but as far as Learned Mr. Majumdar is concerned, probably he has lost, my lord has lost his connection once again. So I'm not very sure my lord is there.
We are really grateful to you, sir, for your kind speech, Justice Dev, which has greatly enlightened and enriched us. On behalf of our firm, I thank Justice Pranab Kumar Dev for kindly accepting our invitation and extending his support to our venture. Sir, you were extremely patient with us. Thank you so much. Without his support, it would not have been possible for us to arrange this webinar. We will present him a memento as token of our regard. I know, sir, this is nothing compared to what you have contributed today, but we would be highly obliged if you accept this.
Yes, I accepted with all my humility.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much from the core of our heart, sir. Thank you so much. This memento, along with some other small gifts, will be dispatched to you to your residence very shortly. Kindly accept it. This is just a way of showing that your presence matters a lot to us. Thank you so much. Without further ado, I thank all our respected participants for attending this webinar and making it a great success. Actually, this webinar is way more successful than the last one. I could see this audience is more responsive, and we expect to have such webinars even more in the future. I also thank Justice Pranab Kumar Dev and other dignitaries on and off the dais for participating in this webinar and making it a grand success. We are thankful to our associates who rendered a great support to us. Above all, today afternoon, we have had the support of an amazingly erudite and responsive audience, without whose cooperation it would have been impossible for us to have such enlightening season. As we had declared previously, all the participants of this national webinar will receive their respective certificates by September 25th, 2020. Hope to see all of you on the next webinar that Messrs. Bhattacharyas and Associates organize. Thank you. We will call a close of this meeting. Thank you so much.
Before the closer, I will simply say 2 or 3 words for the audience. It is one of the best experiences of mine since our webinar this time was, it got distracted for certain connection problems. But anyway, all of you stayed there, and the comments that are coming, that keeps on coming, that's very encouraging. And a special thanks to Ms. Ritapa Sinha, and obviously my dear beloved wife, Devarupa Bhattacharya, for conducting.
Thank you. It means a lot.
Devarupa Bhattacharya,
Thank you so much. Again, like after 8 years of marriage, you're not supposed to appreciate your wife. But
you should not.
Thank you so much.
All the married people amongst us know what happens anyway. So anyway, thanks a lot. This will be it from the web desk of Bhattacharyas and Associates. We will try to come out with more innovative sessions like this. Hope you all enjoyed. Vande Mataram.